He didn't realize the woman he just humiliated was about to become his new boss, and she wasn't the forgiving type. Clara Johnson stood breathless at gate C14 of Pine Haven International Airport, her heart pounding after sprinting nearly half a mile through the terminal. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, she could still see the aircraft idling just a few feet away, passengers settling into their seats, overhead bins clicking shut. But the boarding door was already closed. In front of her stood Eric Simmons, the gate manager, arms crossed with a smirk only a man drunk on a little power could wear. His expression was the perfect blend of corporate smugness and petty satisfaction, like a HOA Karen about to enforce a rule she barely understood. "I'm sorry, Miss Johnson," Eric drawled, loud enough for others nearby to hear. "But you know the policy, doors close 15 minutes before departure. No exceptions." Clara glanced down at her watch. "It's 14 minutes before scheduled departure," she said, struggling to keep her voice even. "I just sprinted half a mile through this terminal. The plane is still sitting right there." Eric tapped his wrist dramatically. "My clock says 15, and besides, I've already processed the final count. The door is closed." Around them, the usual symphony of a bustling airport echoed, boarding announcements, luggage carts humming by, the smell of overpriced coffee hanging in the air. Yet in that moment, Clara felt the sting of something far more personal, being underestimated. She took a slow breath. "Listen, I get that policies exist, but my meeting with the board ran late. This is the last flight to Westfield tonight. I have to be there for tomorrow morning's opening." Her tone was calm, professional, the voice of a woman who had spent 15 years climbing through the brutal world of aviation management. But Eric didn't flinch. In fact, he let his gaze drift down Clara's tailored navy suit, her pearl earrings, the Louis Vuitton briefcase clutched in her hand, calculating. "I'm sorry," he said, voice thick with false sympathy. "Maybe next time you should plan better. Our next flight to Westfield is at 6:15 a.m. Customer service can rebook you." He jerked his thumb toward the desk 60 feet away, where a line of irritated passengers already waited. Clara felt that familiar, heavy knot settle in her stomach, the one she knew all too well. The weight of being judged, of having to prove herself again and again. She'd met men like Eric her entire career, men who saw her, a black woman, as some kind of mistake, an oversight, a diversity hire. "Is there someone else I can speak with?" Clara asked, voice level but tight. Eric's smile grew wider. "Nope, I'm the gate manager on duty, Miss Johnson. There's no one else. The decision's final." Clara nodded slowly. She made a mental note of his name, his face, his arrogance. What she didn't say was that come Monday morning when she walked into Pine Haven International Airport as the newly appointed Director of Operations for Whitmore Global Airways, Eric Simmons would be her first problem to solve. Instead, she forced a smile. "Thank you for your time." Turning away, Clara pulled out her phone and called her assistant. "Vanessa, he did it. Simmons denied me boarding." Vanessa's knowing sigh was loud through the phone. "Let me guess. He enjoyed it. You warned me." "Terminal C is his playground," Vanessa said. 3 complaints just last quarter, mostly from female executives. But Frank Holloway keeps protecting him. Frank Holloway, the outgoing Director of Operations, the very man Clara was hired to replace. A man who had built a good old boys club at this airport that Eric clearly felt safe in. "Well," Clara muttered, watching as the plane slowly pushed back from the gate 14 minutes before its scheduled departure. "Mr. Simmons and I will have much to discuss on Monday." "I can book the company jet," Vanessa offered. Clara thought about it. "No, put me on the 6:15 commercial tomorrow. Tonight I'm reviewing every personnel file for Terminal C, starting with Simmons." Just then a family of 4, white of course, came running up breathless. Clara turned in time to see Eric's face transform. Warm smile, friendly wave, and unbelievably, he opened the gate door and let them through. Clara's jaw clenched. Same flight, same gate, different skin color, different outcome. She turned away, heading to the executive lounge. There was work to do. Across Pinehaven International's Terminal C, while Eric Simmons was busy flexing his petty authority at Gate C14, Natalie Parker, head of security for Whitmore Global Airways, faced a different kind of crisis. Her sharp eyes were locked on the surveillance footage playing across the massive monitor in front of her. "Play it again, from the beginning," Natalie instructed Michael Jefferson, the young security tech nervously shifting beside her. The footage rewound, showing a well-dressed, middle-aged white man sliding a sleek silver laptop into the seat pocket at Gate C9, right before heading off to the restroom. Moments later, the man returned, glanced around, then raised hell. According to his complaint, the laptop had vanished, and he was certain the culprit was Ama Osai, a black cleaning woman working the gate area. "She's been with us 8 years, Michael muttered, disgusted. Not a single incident, but he just knows she took it. Natalie kept her face unreadable, though her jaw clenched. "Keep watching." The footage rolled. It showed the man himself, come as you please, pulling the laptop out of the seat pocket and tucking it into his own carry-on in the overhead bin. Clear as day, a fact the man conveniently forgot once he started pointing fingers. "Son of a," Michael breathed. "Exactly." Natalie's voice was pure steel. "Send that clip to HR and legal right now. I want a formal apology issued to Ms. Osai by noon tomorrow. And mark that passenger's profile. I want to know the second he files another complaint. Ever." Michael nodded, clearly relieved. "She's in tears back there. Said he told her she should be deported." Natalie's throat tightened. She'd worked too hard, fought through too much in her own career to see another black woman's dignity stripped by some entitled businessman. "I'll talk to her personally." She grabbed the file folder off the desk. "And Michael, review our security protocols. Ms. Osai was questioned in front of passengers. That violates every policy we have. That doesn't happen again." As Natalie stood, her phone buzzed. A text from Clara Johnson, the woman she'd quietly rooted for since her interview for the Director of Operations job. "Simmons at C14 just denied me boarding. Flight still at the gate. Watching him let a white family board late. We need to talk." Natalie's lips pressed into a thin line. Eric Simmons. Of course. She'd butted heads with him more than once. His selective enforcement of rules was legendary around Terminal C. She tapped out a quick reply. "Not surprised. His personnel file is illuminating. Dinner tonight, Maple Heights Grand at 8. Seconds later, Clara replied, "Perfect. Bringing files. This place needs an overhaul." Natalie allowed herself a small, grim smile as she slid her phone away. The old guard had no idea what was coming. Meanwhile, Captain Daniel Cooper sat in the cockpit of Whitmore Global Flight 782, taxiing away from Gate C14. Frustration simmered just below the surface. He glanced toward his first officer, Vanessa Reynolds, who was finishing the final pre-takeoff checks. "Tower, this is Whitmore 782. Ready for departure," Daniel radioed in. "Whitmore 782, cleared for takeoff, runway 4R, came the response. As Daniel guided the aircraft forward, Vanessa's jaw tightened. That was unacceptable back there, the way Simmons handled the gate closure. Daniel nodded grimly. "I've seen him pull that stunt before, but tonight, refusing that woman and then letting that family board?" He shook his head. "Disgraceful." "I'm filing a report when we land," Vanessa said, "though it probably won't do any good." Daniel shot her a sideways glance. "Don't sell yourself short, Reynolds. You're one of the best pilots I've flown with." She gave a tight smile. "You'd be amazed how little that matters sometimes. Do you know how many passengers assume I'm a flight attendant? How many question if it's safe with a black woman in the cockpit?" Daniel was silent. Finally, he admitted, "I can't imagine, not really." Vanessa shrugged. "It's constant and subtle. I've had to prove myself 10 times harder than some kids straight out of flight school, just because of my skin color and my gender." I remember Dallas, Daniel said quietly. That ground crew idiot who made the racist joke. Didn't realize I could hear him through the open window. Vanessa nodded. You reported it. You pushed for the investigation when everyone else wanted to sweep it under the rug. Daniel sighed. I didn't do anything special, Reynolds. Just what anyone should have done. That's the problem, though. It should be normal. But it isn't. They flew in silence for a moment, New Jersey and New York sprawling out below them like a glittering map. Finally, Daniel added, Word is Parker's retiring. New director of ops starts Monday. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. You know who? Daniel smiled faintly. Clara Johnson, former FAA oversight, MBA from Wharton. Cleaned up that mess at Chicago Hub after the 2023 meltdown. Word is, she doesn't tolerate discrimination. Vanessa let out a low whistle. That's interesting timing. Dawson and his little crew are going to be nervous. They don't know yet, Daniel said. Parker's kept it quiet, but I heard from someone in corporate. She's planning a full overhaul of ground ops. Vanessa gave a short laugh. She'll need backup. The old boys club here, they won't go quietly. Daniel grinned. Well, she's got mine. You know, Daniel, Vanessa added softly, in all my years flying, you're the first pilot who's ever really stood up for me. He flushed. It shouldn't be a big deal. It is, Vanessa insisted, because it's so rare. Daniel fell silent, staring out into the dark sky. He knew change was coming. He could feel it, like the electricity in the air before a summer thunderstorm. I just hope, Vanessa murmured, she's ready for the fight. Daniel smiled thinly. Oh, I get the feeling she is. But from what I've heard, Daniel Cooper added grimly, his eyes fixed on the dark horizon as the plane leveled at 35,000 feet, Clara Johnson isn't someone who backs down from a fight. The soft ding of the seatbelt sign going off filled the cockpit. Still, Daniel couldn't shake the lingering image of the woman Simmons had turned away back at Gate Seaford. He hadn't gotten a clear look at her, but something about the way Eric Simmons handled it, cold, calculated, and arrogant, had made Daniel's skin crawl. He'd seen that behavior before, too many times. Maybe, just maybe, with new leadership, it might finally end. Back at Pine Haven International's executive lounge, Clara sat across from Natalie Parker, their dinner barely touched. Instead, the table between them was buried under personnel files and damning reports. The tension was thick, the air electric with the weight of what they were uncovering. Eric Simmons, 47, 18 years with Whitmore Global Airways. Natalie read aloud, her voice icy. 4 formal complaints in the last year alone for inconsistent enforcement of boarding policies. All from women. 3 out of 4 were women of color. Clara let out a bitter laugh, unsurprised. And let me guess, his performance reviews? Natalie slid a document across the table. Glowing, exemplary adherence to protocol, strong leadership, upholds company standards, all written by Frank Holloway himself. Clara shook her head. They golf together, don't they? Every Saturday at Maple Heights Country Club, Natalie confirmed, and not just Holloway and Simmons, half the senior ground operations team. The female staff call it the Pine Haven Boys Club. Clara took a slow sip of water, her mind already connecting the dots she'd suspected since accepting the job. What about James Whitmore? Natalie's expression darkened. Worse, subtle. His name comes up in more staff complaints than Simmons. Female flight attendants file reports. Suddenly they're stuck with back-to-back overnight runs or last-minute schedule changes. Women in management, mysteriously left off meeting invites. Project deadlines moved up with no notice. Clara flipped through Whitmore's file. No disciplinary actions. Let me guess, protected by Holloway? Roommates at Cornell. Natalie nodded grimly. Clara leaned back, staring at the mountain of paper between them. It wasn't random. It wasn't a few bad apples. It was a system, carefully built and fiercely protected. You know they're going to fight this, Natalie said quietly. especially coming from you. Clara met her gaze. Because I'm a woman? Because you're a black woman, Natalie replied, blunt as ever. And an outsider. Frank's been building his little empire here for a decade. His people are entrenched. Clara's lips curled into a tight, determined smile. Then they'd better brace for a storm. Natalie mirrored her smile. What's the plan? Monday morning, I'm announcing a full audit of all gate management procedures, scheduling practices, and security protocols. I want the data, every denied boarding from the last 6 months, broken down by passenger demographics. Natalie nodded. I've already started gathering the data. It's illuminating. Clara's eyes flashed. I bet it is. I'm also scheduling meetings with every department head, starting with Simmons. He doesn't know you're his new boss yet, does he? Nope, Clara smirked. Frank wanted to manage the transition his way. Translation? Time to warn his boys and set up roadblocks. Natalie's phone buzzed, and almost simultaneously, Clara's did too. Clara glanced at the screen and her face hardened. What is it? Natalie asked. Clara held up her phone. My flight tomorrow morning? The 6:15 a.m. to Westfield Business Summit canceled. Crew scheduling issues. I've been rebooked on the 4 p.m. flight, which means I missed the entire first day. Natalie's eyes narrowed. Let me guess, who controls crew scheduling? They spoke in unison. James Whitmore. Clara exhaled sharply. They're already playing dirty. Should I book the company jet? Natalie offered. Clara's jaw clenched. Yes. Call the pilot. I'm flying out tonight. And Whitmore? Natalie asked. Put him on my Monday meeting list. 8 a.m. sharp. He's going to explain this in person. Natalie watched as Clara gathered the files, a mix of admiration and concern flickering across her face. They're going to fight you every step of the way, Clara. Good, Clara replied, snapping her briefcase shut with a decisive click. I've never been afraid of a fight. While Clara's corporate jet sliced through the night sky toward Chicago, Frank Holloway sat alone in his home office, nursing a glass of 18-year-old scotch. He should have been enjoying his retirement. After 27 years with Whitmore Global, 9 as director of operations at Pinehaven, but instead, an uncomfortable weight sat heavy on his chest. He scrolled through his emails, rereading the message from the board. They'd overruled him. They'd picked Clara Johnson, not his hand-picked successor, James Whitmore. Time for new perspectives, the board had said. Modern leadership for modern challenges. Corporate speak for, we want someone who isn't another white man in his 50s. Frank took another sip, staring at Clara's flawless resume. Harvard undergrad, Wharton MBA, former FAA oversight. Single-handedly turned around the Chicago hub after the 2023 meltdown. She was everything the board wanted, which made her dangerous. His phone rang. James Whitmore, 2 a.m. Frank's stomach sank. This wasn't good. Tom, Frank answered, skipping pleasantries. It's late. She took the company jet, James blurted, panic lacing his voice. Clara Johnson. She's in the air right now. Frank sat up straight, his blood going cold. What? I tried to cancel her commercial flight, crew scheduling. She was supposed to miss the conference, but someone approved the jet. She's halfway to Chicago. Frank cursed under his breath. Do you know who approved it? Not yet, but that's not all, James continued, voice dropping. She's requested full scheduling data for the past year, passenger demographics for all boarding denials, and she scheduled meetings with every department head starting Monday. I'm first. Frank slammed his glass down, scotch sloshing over the edge. She works fast. She's got help, James added darkly. My guess? Natalie Parker. They had dinner tonight at Maple Heights Grand. Frank closed his eyes, a pounding headache blooming behind his temples. Natalie Parker had always been a thorn in his side, too principled to fire, too smart to manipulate. She's planning something big, James warned. And if we don't get ahead of this, Frank cut him off. Call everyone. Emergency meeting tomorrow, my house. Noon. We get our story straight before Monday. After ending the call, Frank reached into his desk drawer, pulling out a thick folder labeled contingency planning. Dirt on board members? Leverage? Fallback positions? They wanted a war? So be it. She's already in Westfield, James Whitmore hissed over the phone, his voice tight with panic. Landed an hour ago. Frank Holloway sat up straight, his scotch nearly spilling. What? I told you to cancel her flight. I did, James shot back. Canceled the 6:15 a.m. commercial, just like you said, but someone from operations approved the company jet. Clara's already there. Frank swore under his breath. He'd counted on the flight cancellation forcing Clara to miss the conference, weakening her position with the board before she even officially started. But she was a step ahead. That's not all, James added grimly. She's requested complete scheduling data for the past year, passenger demographics, boarding denials, and she's scheduled meetings with every department head, starting with me. 8 o'clock a.m., sharp, Monday. Frank slammed his glass down, amber liquid sloshing over the edge. She works fast. She's getting help. My guess, Natalie Parker in security. They had dinner last night. Maple Heights Grand. Frank cursed again. Natalie Parker. Too sharp, too ethical, too dangerous. He'd never been able to control her. Keep eyes on them, Frank growled. What about Eric Simmons? I heard there was a situation at his gate yesterday. James sighed. That's the other thing. Dawson Simmons denied boarding to a passenger running late. Woman of color, designer suit, Louis Vuitton briefcase. Description matches Clara Johnson. Frank closed his eyes. The headache behind his temples pounded. Damn it, Eric. His timing is impeccable as always. James lowered his voice. Frank, I think our new director of operations got a first-hand taste of how things really work around here. Frank gritted his teeth. All right, we adapt. Emergency meeting, my place, tomorrow, noon. We get our story straight before Monday. Hanging up, Frank yanked open his desk drawer and pulled out a thick black binder labeled contingency planning. Inside were years of dirt, leverage on board members, fallback strategies, every trick in his playbook. Frank Holloway had built Whitmore Global's Pine Haven operations into his own personal kingdom. He wasn't about to let some diversity hire take it down. What Frank didn't know was that the small, blinking red light on his home security panel meant someone was already watching. Michael Jefferson, young but brilliant, had quietly accessed the feed, reporting every word straight to Natalie Parker. And across the country in a Westfield hotel suite, Clara Johnson sat with Natalie and Michael on video conference, watching Holloway plot in real time. Keep recording, Clara ordered, her voice ice. And get this to legal. Looks like our timeline just got accelerated. The next day, Frank's suburban New Jersey mansion hosted a secret gathering. 13 department heads, all men, 12 of them white, clustered around Frank's massive dining table. Eric Simmons sat near the head, uncomfortable in his weekend clothes. He missed the protection of his uniform. I still don't get why this is such a big deal, Simmons muttered. She was late. Policy's policy. I've done it 100 times. Because, James snapped, the passenger you denied was Clara Johnson, your new boss. Simmons went pale. How was I supposed to know that? You weren't, Frank interjected, pacing furiously. That's not the issue. The issue is, you let another family board after denying her. They had small kids, Simmons protested weakly. We always make exceptions for families. Oh, sure, sneered Michael Bryant, Terminal C's manager. So an elegantly dressed black woman with a Louis Vuitton gets turned away, but the white family gets ushered right in? That's exactly what Johnson's going to zero in on. A ripple of unease swept the table. The truth was, Everyone in that room had skeletons. Let's not kid ourselves, James Whitmore finally said. The board brought Clara in to modernize operations, which is code for tearing down everything we built. Exactly, Frank nodded. They want to fix what isn't broken, but we have options. He handed out thick folders, each packed with carefully prepared talking points. Stick to these in every meeting. Stay unified. Push efficiency, customer satisfaction, and operational stability. Keep the focus off diversity numbers. What about the data she's demanding? Brian asked. The numbers won't look good, not when you break it down by race and gender. James grinned thinly. Already taken care of. It will experience some technical difficulties. Those database queries, minimum 2 weeks before they're sorted. Buys us time, Frank added. We need to control the narrative. And if she pushes, Simmons asked, beads of sweat forming at his temple. Then, Frank said flatly, we make her changes fail. Slowdowns, it glitches, delayed paperwork, nothing obvious, nothing traceable, but just enough friction to prove her ideas don't work here. A heavy silence followed. Finally, David Lieberman, the youngest at the table, cleared his throat. What if her changes are good? I've seen her numbers out of Chicago. Complaint rates down 43%, on-time departures up 28%. James snorted. Cook stats. I run analytics, David shot back, his voice firm. They're solid. Independent audits confirmed it. Frank's eyes narrowed. David, is your loyalty in question? David sat up straighter. My loyalty is to this airline, to making it better. Maybe instead of planning sabotage, we hear her out. Frank forced a thin smile. Noted, David, but this is about preserving what works. We're not against change, just reckless change. The group nodded, some reluctantly. No one noticed the silent recording feeding every word straight to Clara's hotel room. She's not walking into this blind, Natalie whispered. They have no idea what's coming. Clara smiled coldly. They're fighting for their kingdom, but I didn't come to Pine Haven to play nice. I came to win. Let me be clear. We're not opposing diversity or inclusion, Frank Holloway declared, pacing in front of his inner circle. We're protecting operational excellence and institutional knowledge. The group of senior managers nodded grimly, everyone except David Lieberman, the youngest at the table and head of customer analytics. Look, Frank continued, Johnson may have succeeded in Chicago, but Pine Haven is different, more complex. She needs our expertise. And if she doesn't want it, Eric Simmons asked, still looking uneasy. Then, Frank said flatly, we make sure those changes fail. Scheduling hiccups, IT issues, paperwork delays, nothing dramatic, nothing traceable, just enough friction to show the board her new approaches don't work here. A round of approving murmurs circled the table, but David sat back, arms crossed, his jaw tight. Finally he spoke, voice lower than the others. What if her changes are actually good ones? What if she has ideas that could improve our operation? The room fell silent, head slowly turning his way. Frank's eyes narrowed. David, your loyalty's starting to sound questionable. David straightened his spine. My loyalty is to Whitmore Global Airways. I've been here 11 years. I've reviewed Johnson's work in Chicago. Complaints down 43, on-time departures up 28%, staff turnover cut in half. James Whitmore scoffed. Those Chicago numbers? Cooked. Anyone with half a brain can manipulate statistics. I run our analytics department, James, David snapped. Those numbers aren't cooked. Independent audits verified them. Frank stepped in before the brewing argument exploded. David, I hear you, and no one's saying we won't listen to Johnson. We're just preparing. If her priorities don't align with what we know works here at Pine Haven, we'll be ready. David clenched his jaw but fell silent, flipping through the talking points folder Frank had handed out. The rest of the group relaxed, reassured. None of them realized their supposedly private, secure discussion was being transmitted in real time to a hotel room in Westfield, where Clara Johnson watched every move. "Keep recording," Clara instructed quietly, her eyes sharp. Natalie Parker and Michael Jefferson sat beside her, reviewing the live feed. "Send this to legal. By the time I walk into Pine Haven Monday morning, we'll be ready." As Frank and his allies finalized their sabotage plan, Clara boarded her flight back to Pine Haven, her work at the conference complete. But she wasn't flying alone. Seated beside her in first class was Carmen Washington, Whitmore Global's general counsel, a no-nonsense black woman in her early 50s, sharp-eyed and battle-tested from years breaking barriers in corporate America. "I've reviewed everything," Carmen said quietly, scrolling through the transcripts on her tablet. "Frank's created a textbook hostile work environment. The discrimination patterns in hiring, promotion, and policy enforcement, impossible to ignore." Clara nodded, her voice low but steady. "And now we have them on record, plotting to undermine me. This isn't just about me, Carmen. This is systemic. It affects every employee, every passenger." Carmen gave her an approving glance. "You know, when the board picked you, there were whispers that you were just a diversity hire, that you didn't have the backbone to face Pine Haven's entrenched problems." Clara smirked. "I'm familiar with those whispers. They follow every woman of color who rises to leadership." "They do," Carmen agreed, "but those whispers end tomorrow." Clara raised an eyebrow. "The board's ready?" "More than ready," Carmen confirmed, closing her tablet with a decisive click. After seeing this evidence, they fast-tracked everything. Frank Holloway's retirement, effective immediately. James Whitmore, administrative leave pending investigation. "And Simmons?" Clara asked, a cold smile curling her lips. "I have special plans for Mr. Simmons." Carmen's brow lifted. "Do tell." "Not termination," Clara replied. "At least not yet. I think it's time Mr. Simmons became Whitmore Global's most enthusiastic diversity and inclusion champion." Carmen chuckled, intrigued. "Now that I need to hear." "First, he'll undergo mandatory retraining," Clara outlined. "Then he's going to lead our new boarding fairness initiative, weekly demographic audits, reports directly to me, and his performance bonuses tied directly to equitable treatment statistics." Carmen let out a low whistle. "Rehabilitation over punishment." "Exactly," Clara nodded. "Reynolds, though? His pattern runs too deep. Some can change, others won't." Before Carmen could reply, the flight attendant approached with pre-takeoff beverages. Both women fell silent until she passed. "And the rest of that little cabal?" Carmen asked. "Case by case," Clara answered. "David Lieberman showed some moral courage. He'll be useful. Michael Bryant, problematic, but respected. If he adapts, there might be a path forward." "Surgical, not scorched earth," Carmen mused. "The board will like that." "This was never about revenge," Clara said firmly. "It's about building an airline that treats everyone, staff and passengers, with respect and fairness, where policies apply equally and excellence, not favoritism, is the standard." Carmen studied Clara for a long moment. "You're going to change this place." Clara gave a small, determined smile. "That's the plan." Outside, the night sky stretched wide and dark as the plane raced toward Pine Haven and toward a reckoning that would shake the very foundations of Whitmore Global Airways. "Michael Bryant has a problematic record," Carmen Washington said thoughtfully, tapping the personnel file. "But he's respected by his team. If he's willing to adapt, there might be a path forward." Clara Johnson nodded, her expression calm but resolute. "That's the approach. Surgical, not scorched earth. The board will appreciate it." "This isn't about revenge," Clara added firmly. "It's about building an airline where everyone, employees and passengers, is treated with respect, where policies are applied consistently, regardless of race, gender, or background, where excellence is the standard, not favoritism. Outside the aircraft window, the sky had turned a deep orange as the sun dipped low. The plane taxied toward the runway. Tomorrow, everything would change at Pine Haven International Airport, and those changes would ripple far beyond. Clara was ready for the resistance, the hard conversations, the fight. But first, she had a particularly satisfying meeting scheduled with Eric Simmons. Monday morning dawned with the usual chaos of Pine Haven International, thousands of passengers flowing through security, loudspeaker announcements echoing, aircraft taxiing in tight choreography. But inside the executive offices of Whitmore Global Airways, a heavy tension hung in the air. At 7:30 a.m. sharp, Clara Johnson strode through the executive entrance, her deep crimson suit making a statement. She was here, and she wasn't going anywhere. Waiting in the lobby were Natalie Parker, Carmen Washington, and two board members who'd flown in early to witness the reckoning. "Everything's ready," Natalie confirmed. "The all-hands email went out at 7 a.m., announcing Frank Holloway's immediate retirement. And your appointment." Clara smiled slightly. "And James Whitmore?" "Received notice of administrative leave 10 minutes ago," Natalie nodded. "And Simmons, he should be walking into the conference room right about now." "Still thinking he's meeting with Frank." Clara's smile widened. "Perfect. And the others from that little Sunday meeting?" "All scheduled for one-on-ones throughout the day," Natalie replied. "None of them know about the surveillance." At that moment, Clara's phone buzzed. She glanced down, then grinned. "Lucas Montgomery and Priya Sharma just texted. They want a meeting this afternoon, said they have insights on gate operations." Natalie arched a brow. "The pilot and first officer from the flight Simmons canceled?" Clara nodded. "Good allies to have. Schedule them for 2 p.m. But first, let's not keep Mr. Simmons waiting." The conference room fell deathly silent as Clara entered, followed by Carmen, Natalie, and the two board members. Eric Simmons stood abruptly, his face draining of color the moment he recognized Clara from the gate incident. He stammered, "Miss Johnson, Clara held up a hand. "Please, Mr. Simmons, sit." He obeyed, sinking into his chair as if the weight of the world had just dropped on his shoulders. "We have much to discuss," Clara began, her voice cool and professional. "Specifically, your gate management protocols, particularly how consistently or inconsistently they're applied." For the next 30 minutes, Clara laid out the data with surgical precision. Every discrepancy, every disturbing pattern. The numbers spoke for themselves. Passengers of color, particularly women, were 3 times more likely to be denied boarding for late arrivals compared to white passengers, even when arrival times were identical. "This data," Clara concluded, her voice steady, "tells a concerning story, Mr. Simmons, one that exposes Whitmore Global to significant legal liability, not to mention reputational damage, and it violates our core values." Simmons, now visibly sweating, tried to speak. "These are just numbers. They don't show context. Families with children—" "Yes, let's talk about families," Claire interrupted smoothly, her eyes narrowing. "Our data shows that white families with children were given boarding exceptions 97% of the time when arriving late. Families of color, only 30. Her voice dropped, each word sharp as a blade. "How do you explain that disparity, Mr. Simmons?" Simmons stared at his hands. He had no answer. "I thought not," Clara said crisply. "Now, typically a pattern like this would result in immediate termination." She slid a folder across the table. "However, I'm offering you an alternative." Inside was a detailed performance improvement plan and a new job description that made Simmons' stomach churn. "You have 2 choices," Clara continued. "Resign or become the face of our commitment to fair treatment for all passengers." Simmons blinked. "You want me to be responsible for Diversity? Clara smiled coldly. Poetic, isn't it? Who better to champion change than someone intimately familiar with the problem? She leaned back, voice calm but unyielding. Effective immediately, you'll lead our new equitable boarding initiative. Weekly demographic audits, reports, to me, personally. She let that settle before adding, your compensation will be tied directly to improvement in these metrics, and you'll begin comprehensive unconscious bias training this afternoon. Simmons sat frozen, his mouth opening and closing, unable to speak. You have until noon to decide, Mr. Simmons, Clara finished. I suggest you use that time to reflect on which path offers you the better future. With that, she stood. Meeting adjourned. Simmons stumbled out of the room moments later, pale and shaken. Natalie smirked. You think he'll stay? Clara's expression softened, but only slightly. Self-preservation is a powerful motivator. He's got a mortgage, 2 kids in college, and 18 years with this airline. Starting over won't be appealing. And if he stays, Natalie asked, can he really change? Clara shrugged. Maybe. People surprise you, if given the right incentive. Carmen smiled approvingly. That was impressive. Clara straightened her crimson jacket, one down, the rest to follow. Outside, the morning sun gleamed over Pine Haven International. The first moves had been made, and for the first time in a long time, change was in the air. Self-preservation is a powerful motivator, Clara Johnson said quietly, her gaze steady as she watched the sun dip behind the tarmac. He's got a mortgage, 2 kids in college, and 18 years with the airline. Starting over at his age won't be appealing. Natalie Parker leaned in, skeptical. But do you think he'll really change? Clara's expression softened, just slightly. Sometimes people surprise you, Natalie. Sometimes they just need the right incentive. And if Simmons can't change, or won't, his failure will be documented and actionable. No more protected behavior like before. Throughout that Monday, Clara moved from one meeting to the next, methodical, unstoppable. Some leaders like David Lieberman came prepared, offering fresh ideas and solid data. He was eager to work under the new leadership, finally seeing a chance to fix what had been broken for years. Others weren't as ready. They came armed with the same worn-out talking points James Whitmore had passed around the day before, only to freeze as Clara dropped the recorded transcripts of that secret meeting on the table. By mid-afternoon, word of the leadership shakeup had spread like wildfire across Pine Haven International Airport. The tension was thick, but something else was bubbling underneath. Hope. At 2 p.m. sharp, pilots Lucas Montgomery and Priya Sharma arrived for their scheduled meeting. Both had been waiting a long time for this moment. What you're doing is long overdue, Lucas said, his voice low but steady as he handed Clara a thick folder of reports. This airline's always bragged about being a leader in tech and customer service. It's about time we lead in equality, too. Priya nodded in agreement, her dark eyes flashing. Change won't happen overnight, Clara. You know that. There'll be resistance, backlash. But you already have allies across departments, people who've been waiting years for someone like you. Clara smiled, truly grateful. That's why transparency is going to be our foundation. No more hidden decisions, no more selective enforcement, no more protection for those who discriminate. She glanced at Priya and Lucas. And I'll need credible people like you, respected faces, to help lead that change. They both nodded. Count us in. As the pilots left, Natalie appeared with a final update. Her grin gave everything away. Well, you'll be happy to hear this. Eric Simmons, he accepted the performance improvement plan. He starts his bias training tomorrow. Clara allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. That's a good start. Oh, and since this morning's announcement, HR's already received 17 new reports of discrimination incidents that were never reported before. Clara nodded, unsurprised. People feel safe coming forward now. That's progress. Natalie hesitated, then added with a grin, "There's one more thing. You remember that white family Simmons let board after denying you?" Clara's jaw tightened. "I remember." "Well, turns out the father overheard what happened, said he felt awful about the double standard but didn't speak up in the moment. He's written a formal apology and offered to record a statement for our training materials about being an active ally against discrimination." Clara's eyes softened. "Accept his offer. Change requires everyone, not just the people who've been marginalized." As the sun set outside, Clara stood at the large window of her new office. She watched as planes took off, one by one, soaring into the darkening sky. This complex machine of people, technology, and power, Pine Haven International Airport, was now her responsibility. Transformation wouldn't be quick. It wouldn't be easy. But the first steps had been taken. Her phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa Reynolds. CNN Business requesting an interview about the leadership changes and your vision for Whitmore Global Airways. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Clara smiled. The story was out, not just the one about a woman being denied boarding who turned out to be the new boss, but the bigger story, a story of systemic change, accountability, creating a workplace where respect and fairness were non-negotiable. She texted back, "Confirm," and Vanessa, "Book Simmons to join me. It's time he starts his new role as our diversity champion." 8 weeks later, the shift at Whitmore Global Airways was visible and undeniable. The executive offices, once the stronghold of Whitmore's inner circle, now buzzed with new energy, new faces, a diverse leadership team that finally reflected the passengers they served. Meetings that once echoed with the same tired voices now included perspectives long silenced. And at Gate A14, where Clara's journey had begun, Eric Simmons stood before a group of fresh-faced new gate agents, leading a training session. "The most important thing to remember," Simmons said, gesturing to the laminated checklist in each trainee's hands, "is consistency. Every passenger, every one of them, deserves the same consideration. No exceptions, no judgment based on appearance, accent, or anything else." From a distance, Clara and Natalie watched in silence. "I still can't believe the turnaround," Natalie whispered. Clara nodded slowly. "He's not perfect, old habits die hard, but the metrics don't lie. Boarding denials are down, and the racial and gender disparities, almost gone." "And passenger satisfaction scores?" Natalie asked. "Up significantly," Clara confirmed. "Turns out, treating people fairly is good for business. Who knew?" They shared a knowing smile and began walking toward their next meeting. "The board's impressed," Natalie added. "Quarterly numbers beat projections, employee retention's up, and the media coverage, all positive." "It's not all smooth sailing," Clara cautioned. "There's still resistance. That lawsuit from James Whitmore claiming reverse discrimination, and a few anonymous complaints about lowering standards." Natalie shrugged. "We have the data. We have the facts. Reynolds and Whitmore's old system was bad for business. Everything we've done proves it." They paused as they passed through the terminal, spotting Priya Sharma surrounded by high school students, part of Whitmore's new aviation mentorship program for minority youth. "Is it true you weren't allowed on a flight and then became the boss?" one of the teens asked Clara excitedly. Clara laughed. "That's simplifying it, but yes, there's truth to that. Just remember, sometimes the people everyone underestimates are exactly the ones who should be in charge." "Did you fire that gate agent?" another teen pressed. "No," Clara said seriously. "I gave him a chance to change, and he took it." Sometimes the most powerful transformation isn't about punishment. It's about creating the space for people to be better and building something stronger than what came before. Her phone buzzed. Eric Simmons. "Just got the latest satisfaction scores. My team's celebrating. Thank you." For For the second chance, I won't let you down. Clara smiled. Outside the windows, aircraft rose into the sky, carrying passengers who would now experience a new Pine Haven International. And this was only the beginning. Turns out, treating people fairly is good for business. Who knew? Natalie Parker remarked with a small, knowing smile as she and Clara Johnson turned away from the gate. Clara chuckled softly. It is, isn't it? They walked through the bustling terminal of Pine Haven International Airport, the hum of travelers surrounding them as they headed toward their next meeting. The board's impressed, Natalie continued. Quarterly numbers are exceeding projections, employee retention's up, and the media coverage of our diversity initiatives, it's generating positive buzz everywhere. We're getting calls from other airports asking what changed. Clara nodded but kept her gaze steady. It's not all smooth sailing, though. We still have pockets of resistance. Her jaw tightened slightly. There's Thomas Reynolds' lawsuit, Bondon. He's claiming wrongful termination. And of course, the anonymous complaints accusing us of reverse discrimination and lowering standards. Natalie shrugged. True, but honestly, Clara, we've got facts on our side. Reynolds' case won't hold up against the documentation. And the performance metrics, they speak for themselves. Every single operational indicator has improved under the new system. They passed through security with their administrative credentials and made their way toward Terminal CA, where Priya Sharma was already waiting to discuss the new pilot mentorship program, a project designed to support young women interested in aviation careers. You know what still amazes me? Clara said thoughtfully. How quickly most people adapted once the expectations were clear and consistently enforced. It suggests that most of them knew the old system was unfair. They just didn't have the incentive or the courage to challenge it. Natalie's lips pressed together, nodding in agreement. That's how these systems survive. Enough people benefit or feel powerless to change anything. You change the equation on both sides, Clara. As they approached the meeting room, they spotted Lucas Montgomery and Priya deep in conversation with a group of eager high school students. The students were part of the new Future Flyers program, offering diverse youth hands-on exposure to aviation careers, a first for Pine Haven International. One student, wide-eyed, looked up as Clara approached. Ms. Johnson, I read about you. Is it true you got denied boarding, and now you run the whole airport? Clara laughed, her voice warm. That's simplifying it a bit, but yes, there's some truth to that story. Another student, a young black girl in a leather jacket, chimed in excitedly. What happened to that gate agent? Did you fire him? Clara's smile faded into something more serious. No, I gave him the opportunity to learn and change, and he took it. Sometimes the most powerful transformation isn't about removing people. It's about helping them see things differently. The students nodded, absorbing the weight of that answer. Lucas gave Clara a quiet nod of respect, while Priya's expression held something like pride. That, Clara thought, was leadership, not about power, but creating a system where everyone had the chance to be better. Just then, David Lieberman emerged from the meeting room, tablet in hand. Sorry to interrupt, he said, but there was excitement in his voice. I thought you'd want to see this right away. He handed Clara the tablet. The new customer satisfaction scores, specifically from the revised boarding procedures, were at an all-time high, Clara, across the board. Clara scanned the numbers, a satisfied smile tugging at her lips. Send this to Eric Simmons immediately. His team deserves to know their work is making a difference. David nodded, already tapping away. As the group filed into the meeting room, Clara paused at the door. She took a long look at the scene. Eager students, engaged employees, a buzz of energy and purpose that now permeated Pine Haven's operations. The cynics had predicted she wouldn't last 6 months, not against the entrenched interests or the old guard mentality. Yet here they were, 2 months in, and not only surviving, but thriving. There would be more challenges ahead. Of course, institutional change was never easy, never clean, and certainly never linear. But right now, watching Priya explain the flight simulator to a young woman whose eyes shone with possibility, Clara knew they were on the right path, not just for Whitmore Global Airways, but for the entire aviation industry that had lagged behind for too long. Her phone buzzed. A message from Eric Simmons. Just received the satisfaction scores. My team's celebrating. Thank you, Clara, for the second chance. I won't let you down. Clara's eyes softened as she tucked the phone away. That was the victory right there. Not revenge, not punishment, but creating a space where people became better versions of themselves. And in doing so, building something stronger than what had ever existed before. Outside the windows, the sky blazed with hues of orange and purple as the aircraft continued their choreographed dance of takeoffs and landings, each one carrying hundreds of passengers who would now experience a Pine Haven International Airport slowly but surely becoming what it always should have been. A place where everyone was treated with equal respect, where policies were applied consistently, and where the only standard that mattered was excellence. It had all begun with a denied boarding, a closed gate, a moment of discrimination that might have gone unaddressed, like countless others before it. Instead, it became the catalyst for transformation. Proof that sometimes the wrong person to turn away is exactly the right person to lead the way forward. If there's one powerful lesson to take away from this story, it's that real leadership isn't about titles, seniority, or holding on to outdated systems. It's about having the courage to confront what's broken and the vision to rebuild something better. What happened at Pine Haven International Airport is a reflection of challenges many of us see every day, whether in our workplaces, communities, or even our own HOA boards. Power often protects itself, building circles of loyalty, rewarding those who follow the rules while punishing those who dare to speak up. For years, people like Richard Dawson and Thomas Reynolds thrived because they knew how to play that game, hiding behind policies, twisting rules when convenient, and making decisions based on who someone was, not what they deserved. And let's be honest, how many of us have watched that happen and felt powerless to stop it? But Clara Johnson's story reminds us that change is possible, even in the most resistant environments. It shows us that exposing injustice isn't always about shouting the loudest or burning everything down. Sometimes the smartest move is gathering facts, staying calm, and forcing the system to answer for itself. Clara didn't rush to fire people or seek revenge. She gave people like Dawson the chance to face their own actions, to change or be held accountable. And that's a lesson many of us need to hear. Accountability and redemption can exist side by side. Sometimes the people we think will never change just need someone to finally hold up a mirror. There's also a deeper truth here about bias, how it creeps into systems and decisions quietly until it becomes a norm. Dawson didn't think twice about bending the rules for a white family with children while slamming the door shut on a well-dressed Asian American woman. Why? Because that's what he'd always done, and no one ever stopped him. But when those patterns get exposed, when the data is laid bare, it forces us all to ask hard questions. Are we really being fair? Are our rules protecting safety and efficiency, or are they just a cover for prejudice? In Clara's case, shining that light made all the difference. It proved that when you start measuring fairness, when you make people answer for their decisions, things change. Because bias hates sunlight. It thrives in secrecy, and that's just how we've always done it. The story also teaches us that true change is never easy. There will always be people like Reynolds who cry foul the moment the playing field is leveled. They'll claim reverse discrimination, lowered standards, or loss of tradition because they know the old system favored them. But the results at Pine Haven speak for themselves. Customer satisfaction soared, employee retention improved, complaints dropped. Because when you build systems rooted in fairness and consistency, everyone wins. The good employees thrive, the bad ones either improve or move on, and customers feel the difference. Perhaps the most inspiring part of this story is seeing someone like Richard Dawson, who started as part of the problem, transform into part of the solution. That's rare, and it shows us that redemption is possible, but only when there's accountability. Dawson didn't change because someone asked nicely. He changed because the system changed around him. He was forced to confront the consequences of his actions and given a clear path forward. Change or leave. That's the kind of leadership that lasts, not leadership based on punishment or power plays, but on setting a new standard and sticking to it. For anyone who's ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or flat out excluded, this story hits home. It's a reminder that the very people some try to push aside are often the ones most capable of creating real, lasting change. And it's proof that the right leader, armed with data, determination, and a clear moral compass, can turn even the most toxic environment around. At the end of the day, Clara's journey isn't just about fixing an airport. It's about proving that fairness, respect, and accountability aren't just buzzwords. They're good business. They create stronger teams, better service, and healthier communities. And that's a lesson every HOA board, every company, every neighborhood should take to heart. Because when you stop letting bias and favoritism run the show, when you insist on treating people with dignity and fairness, you don't just change policies, you change lives. If you enjoyed this story and believe more people need to hear about standing up against unfair systems, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps us reach more viewers like you. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed or experienced something like this? Share your story down in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're new here or love stories about justice, HOA drama, and real change, make sure you subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you never miss an episode. There are plenty more powerful stories coming your way, and I'd love to have you along for the ride. And hey, share this video with someone you know who needs to hear this message. Together, we can spread these stories and inspire change, one story at a time.